Okay, so like trying to figure out Elon Musk, it's kind of like, trying to solve one of those Rubik's cubes. But while you're like on a roller coaster or something,
Mm.
there's just so much to unpack with this guy.
Yeah,
All these different layers.
it really
We've
is.
got like mountains of articles, biographies, even some stuff from people who have like worked with him firsthand.
Yeah,
And it's a lot too.
absolutely.
So that's what we're doing today, a deep dive into like who Elon Musk is as a person.
Right. Not just the headlines. Not just the Tesla and SpaceX stuff.
Right, the real deal.
Exactly. We're going to try to like peel back those layers, try to understand what makes him tick,
Yeah.
the motivations, the personality, the character behind all of that.
Yeah. And for everyone listening, I know you're probably just as curious as we are.
For
I
sure.
mean, this guy's dreaming of Mars, sending rockets into space.
Yeah.
And then, like, somehow finds time to get into Twitter wars with, well, everyone, it seems.
Right, pretty much.
So buckle up. We're going to unpack all of it.
We're going to try to make sense of the man behind the myth, Elon Reeve Musk.
Right.
Born in 1971, Pretoria, South Africa.
Okay, Pretoria.
Yeah, and Pretoria itself has an interesting history, founded by a Boer general who actually had a bit of a rebellious streak himself.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you're saying, like, the city itself was like a breeding ground for,
Yeah.
Future rule breakers?
Maybe.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But how much do you think, like, growing up in South Africa actually shaped the Elon Musk we know today?
It's definitely a factor. I mean, his mom's side of the family was full of adventurers.
Okay.
Like her dad, Elon's grandfather, he was this incredible character, moved the family from Canada to South Africa
Wow.
and spent years searching for the lost city of the Kalahari.
No way.
Yeah, he actually mapped it out using a compass.
So, like, serious Indiana Jones vibes.
Totally.
Okay, so we've got adventurous spirit checked off the list.
Okay.
What about his dad?
His father, Elon Musk, was a successful engineer, but from a lot of what we've read, a pretty tough and emotionally distant figure. Yeah, there's some stories about him being quite harsh at times, which paints a very different picture than, like, the adventurous, free-spirited side of the family.
Okay, so you got this contrast, right? This like
Right.
family legacy of exploration,
Right.
but then maybe a kind of difficult relationship with his father.
Yeah.
Do you think that tension played a role in shaping Elon's drive and ambition?
It's certainly possible. Think about it. You've got this inherent desire for adventure, this pull towards the unknown, but maybe also a need to prove himself to kind of overcome those early challenges.
Right, and we can't forget about the bullying either.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Elon has talked about being severely bullied as a kid, which honestly is heartbreaking to hear.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how those experiences might have influenced his outlook on, like, strength and power.
For sure. Experiences like that can definitely shape how someone views the world, how they interact with others, even how they define success.
Right, so we've got this complex picture kind of emerging here, right? A childhood marked by both adventure and hardship, a family with, like, contrasting influences, and then you add in those formative experiences with bullying.
Yeah.
It almost seems like the perfect recipe for creating someone who's driven to escape, to push boundaries, to achieve something extraordinary.
And that's exactly what we see with Elon.
Right.
From a young age, he was fascinated with science fiction devouring books about space travel and all those futuristic technologies.
Yeah, but it wasn't just reading, though, was it?
Right.
He was actually, like, doing things even as a kid.
Yeah, he was.
Remember that story about him hacking those arcade games with his cousin
Oh, yeah.
so they could play for free?
Totally. That story tells us so much about his early entrepreneurial spirit. Even back then, he was finding creative solutions, bending the rules a little bit, outsmarting the system.
And then there's him moving to Canada as a teenager.
Right.
He literally, like, applied for passports for himself and his siblings,
Yeah.
filled out all the paperwork.
Right.
Basically orchestrated the whole thing without his parents even knowing.
Talk about taking initiative. That level of independence and determination at such a young age is pretty remarkable. It really shows that drive to escape, to forge his own path, no matter the obstacles.
Right. It seems like that theme of escape is pretty central to understanding Elon Musk.
Absolutely, it's a recurring theme. He wanted to leave South Africa. He dreamt of going to Mars. He was constantly pushing the boundaries of what was possible with technology. It's like he was always searching for something more, something bigger, something beyond the limits of the world he knew.
And that brings us to his passion for video games,
Yes,
which I think is a really interesting window into his personality.
for sure.
He wasn't just like a casual gamer or anything.
Yeah.
He was obsessed with strategy, with competition, with, like, mastering complex systems.
Exactly. Remember that story about him and his brother Kimball trying to open a video game arcade?
Oh, yeah.
They were so close, but they needed an adult to sign the permits, and Kimball said they couldn't ask their dad because he was too hard of a human.
Wow. That little detail speaks volumes about the family dynamic.
Doesn't it?
It also shows that even as teenagers, Elon was already thinking big, taking risks, figuring out ways to make things happen.
He was.
And let's be real, that competitive streak, that drive to win, it's been a huge part of his success.
Oh, yeah.
But it's also gotten him into trouble along the way.
No doubt about it. That drive can be a double-edged sword. It can fuel incredible achievements, but it can also lead to conflict, to pushing people too hard, to making decisions that maybe aren't always in everyone's best interest.
Right. So we've got this picture of like a young Elon Musk, emerging, brilliant, driven, resourceful, independent, but also maybe a little ruthless.
A little bit.
A little too focused on winning.
Mm.
And I think that's where we start to see the complexity of his character.
Yeah.
The contradictions that make him so fascinating and, let's face it, a little frustrating at times.
It's that combination of traits that makes him such an enigma. He's not just a genius inventor or a savvy businessman. He's a mix of ambition, brilliance, and a sometimes abrasive personality that can rub people the wrong way.
Yeah, and we're just scratching the surface here.
Totally.
We haven't even gotten to like his time at university founding Zip2, the whole PayPal saga.
Right.
It's a lot to unpack,
Is.
but I think it's important to lay this groundwork
It is.
to understand the influences and experiences that shaped the Elon Musk we know today.
Absolutely. It's like putting together a puzzle. Each piece, each story, each anecdote adds another layer of understanding to this incredibly complex and influential figure.
Yeah.
Definitely. So we know Elon wasn't afraid to take risks. Even as a teenager, leaving South Africa, navigating a new country, that takes guts.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's at university where we see that risk-taking really start to shape his career.
Okay.
He goes to Queen's University in Canada, studies economics and physics, but then gets this Thiel Fellowship.
Thiel Fellowship.
Yeah, it's basically a grant for brilliant young minds to drop out of school
Whoa.
and pursue their entrepreneurial dreams.
Wait, so he dropped out of college. That seems pretty risky.
Uh-huh.
Even for Elon. I mean, this is a guy who like devours encyclopedias for fun.
Mhm.
And he just walks away from a traditional education.
It might seem counterintuitive, but for someone like Elon, who was already brimming with ideas, impatient to make things happen,
Yeah.
maybe the traditional academic path just wasn't the right fit.
Right.
He saw an opportunity to dive headfirst into the world of startups,
He did.
and he took it.
And that's where Zip2 comes in, right?
Yeah.
His first real foray into the tech world. But it wasn't all smooth sailing, was it? I mean, the stories about him clashing with his brother Kimball, even getting into physical fights in the office, that's intense.
It definitely highlights that competitive side of him, that drive to win, even if it means pushing people to their limits. And remember, this is the early days of the internet. The dot-com boom is in full swing. Everyone's trying to stake their claim. The pressure is immense.
So maybe some of that intensity was just a product of the environment.
Could be.
But even so, it seems like Elon was always pushing, always demanding more from himself and everyone around him.
That's definitely a recurring theme. And it's interesting to think about the impact that has on the people around him. His brother Kimball, for example, has said that working with Elon was incredibly tough, but he also clearly admires and loves his brother. It's a complicated dynamic for sure.
It is. And then there's the whole PayPal saga.
Oh, yeah.
Elon merges his company, X.com, with Confinity, which is co-founded by Peter Thiel and Max Levchin. Talk about a clash of titans. Those guys were all brilliant, ambitious, used to being in charge.
It's almost like a recipe for disaster, isn't it?
Yeah, God,
You put all those big personalities in a room together with millions of dollars at stake, and something's got to give.
And it did.
It did.
Elon ends up being ousted as CEO,
Yeah.
replaced by Peter Thiel.
Right.
Now, for most people, that would be a crushing blow, a career-ending setback.
Yeah.
But not for Elon Musk.
This is where we see that incredible resilience, that ability to bounce back from failure, even public humiliation, and turn it into fuel for his next venture. It's almost like he thrives on adversity.
He definitely doesn't shy away from it, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And it's after this whole PayPal drama that he really starts to set his sights on those big, audacious goals that he's become known for.
Right. Space exploration with SpaceX, electric cars with Tesla. These aren't just side projects. These are industries that he wants to completely revolutionize.
It's almost crazy to think about. I mean, here's a guy who's made a fortune in the tech world. And he decides to take on two of the most challenging, capital-intensive industries out there. Most people would have said he was nuts.
And maybe he was, in a way. But it's that unwavering belief in his own vision, that willingness to defy conventional wisdom, that sets him apart. He doesn't just want to make money. He wants to change the world.
And he's not afraid to put his money where his mouth is. He pours his entire fortune from the PayPal sale into SpaceX and Tesla, even when both companies are struggling. When everyone's telling him it's a lost cause.
There's this incredible story about the early days of SpaceX. They had 3 failed launches of the Falcon 1 rocket, and they were running out of money. Elon had to borrow money from friends just to make payroll. He was sleeping on the factory floor, working alongside his engineers, doing whatever it took to keep the dream alive.
Talk about dedication. It's almost like he becomes obsessed with these companies, with achieving these seemingly impossible goals. It makes you wonder if there's a downside to that level of intensity, to that single-minded focus.
There's definitely a trade-off. It's that same drive, that same relentless pursuit of his goals. That can also lead to burnout, to strained relationships, to making decisions that prioritize the mission above all else.
And his personal life definitely reflects that struggle.
Yeah.
His first marriage to Justine Musk was tumultuous, to say at least they had 6 children together.
Wow.
But ultimately the pressure, the long hours, the constant focus on work, it all took its toll.
It's hard to imagine maintaining a healthy work-life balance when you're trying to build rockets and revolutionize the car industry. It seems like Elon operates on a different plane of existence, one where sleep is optional and personal time is a luxury he can't afford.
Yeah. And that brings us to his second marriage.
Okay.
To actress Tallulah Riley. Now, this one was even more of a whirlwind.
Oh, yeah.
They got married, divorced, remarried, and divorced again, all within the span of a few years.
It definitely raises questions about whether someone like Elon, with his intense personality and demanding lifestyle, can truly sustain a long-term healthy relationship. It seems like he pours all his energy into his work, leaving very little room for anything else.
Right. And as SpaceX and Tesla start to gain traction, as he achieves more and more success, his public persona also starts to become, well, let's just say more complicated.
That's putting it mildly. The impulsive tweets, the public feuds, the sometimes bizarre behavior. It's like he's constantly pushing the boundaries, testing the limits of what's acceptable, and reveling in the attention, both good and bad.
It's almost like there's a disconnect between the brilliant engineer and visionary entrepreneur and this other side of him, the one that seems to crave controversy and attention.
Right.
And that's where we're going to pick up in the final part of our deep dive. Because honestly, trying to understand Elon Musk's public persona might be the most challenging puzzle of all. So we've talked about, Elon's drive, his ambition, his complicated personal life.
Yeah.
But there's this other side to him, right?
There is.
This public persona that is almost as fascinating and perplexing as his companies themselves.
Yeah.
Where do you even begin to unpack that?
It's almost like watching a high wire act, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
On one hand, you've got this brilliant innovator, this champion of technology who's pushing humanity towards a multiplanetary future.
Right.
But on the other hand, you've got this, well, let's just say unconventional approach to communication.
That's one way to put it. I mean, his Twitter feed alone could be a whole separate deep dive.
Right.
It's a mix of, genuine insights, ambitious pronouncements, and then, well, those impulsive outbursts that tend to, make you feel like.
And it's not just Twitter. Remember that time he smoked marijuana on Joe Rogan's podcast?
Oh, yeah.
Or the whole pedo guy incident with the British cave diver?
Right.
These aren't just PR missteps. Right. They seem to reveal something deeper about his personality.
Yeah.
About how he views the world and interacts with others.
It's almost like he doesn't have this same filter that most people do.
Right.
He says what he thinks when he thinks it consequences be damned. And for someone in his position with his level of influence, that can be kind of a dangerous combination.
It definitely blurs the line between authenticity and recklessness. On one hand, you could argue that his bluntness, his willingness to challenge conventions is part of what makes him such a captivating figure.
Right.
But on the other hand, it can also lead to unnecessary conflicts, damage relationships, and undermine his own credibility.
Yeah. And it's not just his personal life that's affected. Remember the taking Tesla private tweet?
Oh, yeah, that was a big one.
That one little impulsive statement sent shockwaves through the financial markets.
It did.
And led to a very public showdown with the SEC.
It's a perfect example of how his actions, even those seemingly spontaneous outbursts, can have real-world consequences.
For sure.
And it raises questions about his judgment, his ability to separate his personal opinions from his responsibilities as the head of a publicly traded company.
Right. It's like he's constantly pushing the boundaries, testing the limits, both in his work and in his personal life.
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels like he's doing it just to see what will happen, to provoke a reaction.
That's an interesting point. Do you think there's an element of performance to it?
Maybe.
Is he playing a role crafting this persona of the rebellious genius who doesn't play by the rules?
Right.
Or is it just who he is, unfiltered and unapologetically himself?
Honestly, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a bit of both. But I think it's important to remember that he's also incredibly strategic.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
He knows how to use media, how to manipulate public perception, how to create a narrative that benefits him and his companies.
So even those seemingly impulsive moments,
Aye.
those Twitter rants, those off-the-cuff remarks, maybe they're all part of a larger strategy, a way to control the conversation, to keep people talking about him and his ventures.
It's definitely a possibility. But even with all the calculated moves, the carefully crafted image, I think there's also a genuine part of him that craves attention, that thrives on being in the spotlight.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's like he needs that constant validation, that affirmation that he's making a difference, that he's not just another billionaire, but something more, something extraordinary.
And maybe that's the key to understanding Elon Musk.
Maybe.
It's not about separating the genius from the showman, the visionary, from the provocateur.
Hmm.
It's about recognizing that they're all part of the same complex, contradictory, and ultimately fascinating individual. He's driven by this insatiable desire to achieve the impossible, to push the boundaries of human potential.
Right.
And he's willing to do whatever it takes to get there, even if it means bending the rules, breaking conventions, and alienating people along the way.
It's almost Shakespearean, isn't it?
It is.
This tragic hero, driven by ambition, haunted by his own flaws, constantly striving for greatness,
Yeah.
but also capable of incredible self-destruction.
And I think that's what makes him so compelling. He's a reminder that even the most brilliant minds, the most successful individuals are still human. They make mistakes, they have regrets, they struggle with their own demons.
So where does that leave us after this deep dive? After sifting through all the information, the stories, the controversies, what's the takeaway? Is Elon Musk a force for good or a danger to society? Is he a hero or a villain?
Honestly, I don't think there's a simple answer. He's too complex, too contradictory to fit neatly into any box. And maybe that's the point. He challenges us to think critically, to question assumptions, to grapple with the complexities of innovation and ambition in a world that's constantly changing.
Yeah. He's a reminder that progress is rarely straightforward,
It's not.
that innovation often comes with a cost,
Yeah.
and that even those who strive to change the world are still subject to the same human flaws and failings as the rest of us.
He's a mirror to our own anxieties and aspirations, our own fascination with technology and progress, and our own struggle to make sense of the world around us.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the most important thing is to keep asking questions, to stay curious, and to resist the temptation to simplify complex issues or individuals.
Because ultimately, understanding someone like Elon Musk isn't about finding easy answers or passing judgment. It's about embracing the contradictions, the nuances, the messy reality of human ambition, and the impact it has on the world.
And maybe, just maybe, that's the most valuable lesson we can take away from this whole experience. Like,